Syria's army says it's taken control of a military base in the north of the country. It's the latest stage in the implementation of a Washington-brokered ceasefire with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, who partnered with the US to combat ISIL. Troops took over the al-Shaddadi base in coordination with the US after it pulled its forces out of that facility. Well, it comes days after the Syrian military took over another base in al-Tanf that was also used by the US military. Well, the takeover of these military bases is in line with a ceasefire agreed last month that aims to integrate the SDF into central Syrian institutions. It ended weeks of tension and armed confrontations with advancing government troops. Heidi Pett joins us live from Aleppo. Good to see you, Heidi. So we're hearing the word coordination used a lot in official statements, but what does that look like on the ground at al-Shaddadi base, for instance? Are Syrian and American officers working closely together, or is it a case of one force leaving and another simply filling the vacuum left?
Yes, Neve, it's more like the second one. So residents in al-Shaddadi town have told me that over the last week they've been seeing fires and hearing explosions coming from that coalition base, which is thought to be the Americans destroying the remaining equipment in there before they left. And the big observation balloon that has hung over that base observing kilometres of eastern Syria for a number of years hasn't been seen in about 10 days. So it's less that the Syrian army and the Americans are in there together working things out, and more that the Americans are doing a managed handover, which is what we also saw at al-Tanf last week. That's not to say that there is no coordination at all between the Syrian army and the Americans, of course, because what we have seen in the years since the Assad regime fell is intelligence sharing and even joint operations between the Americans and the Syrians in the changing nature of the fight against ISIL.
And Heidi, we know, of course, that the major US base in the region now moves across the border into Jordan. But as the US army withdraws from those bases in Syria, what more do we know about its operations against the remnants of ISIL?
The US has been pretty keen to make clear that while they might be physically withdrawing from Syria, they're closing these bases in the east and the south of the country, and they're also closing bases in Iraq as well. But they will be maintaining operations from the air. So just yesterday, CENTCOM made an announcement saying that in the last week, they've hit 10 ISIL targets across Syria. They say that in the last 2 months, they've captured or killed more than 50 people that they describe as ISIL terrorists. And they've said that they plan to maintain relentless military pressure on the group. And so we will see that in the change from these bombing campaigns to this coordination, as ISIL itself has changed. They've moved out of the Syrian desert after the fall of the regime into these smaller, more independent cells, which are operating in Syrian towns and cities, seeking to take advantage of the fragile transition that's occurring in this country.
Heidi, many thanks for the update. Heidi Pett there in Aleppo. Well, the US has been steadily drawing down its presence in Syria. Numbers have fluctuated over the years, but since July 2025, the number of military personnel has dropped from 1,500 to about 900. Over the past month, US forces have been evacuating male detainees accused of being ISIL fighters out of northeast Syria. It says 5,700 have been taken to Iraq, where they're expected to stand trial. But operations, as we've just been hearing from Heidi, against ISIL haven't stopped. In the first 2 weeks of this month, US forces say they carried out 30 strikes on targets in Syria and neighbouring Iraq. Omar Ozgilic is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, focusing on security, and a Turkish foreign policy specialist. He joins us live from the Turkish capital, Ankara. Good to see you. So with the US relocating its ground hub, as we've just been talking to Heidi in Aleppo about, moving that hub to Tower 22 in Jordan and abandoning that all-important tri-border area at al-Tanf, am I right in thinking that Turkey is now effectively the main external power in northern Syria?
I mean, Turkey was the main external power in northern Syria, so that hasn't changed. But we see that the United States of America has withdrawn from Tanaf military base, which is in southern of Syria. And actually, this base was never intended against ISIS. It was always framed within the countering ISIS mission, but it was a base to limit the Iranian land corridor from Iraq to Lebanon. But that's obsolete now. And now with the withdrawal, the American presence is only inside Jordan now. And in northeastern Syria, where we have seen the withdrawal from the Shaddadi base, this is basically an adjustment of the new reality in Syria. So the United States of America put ground troops on the ground together with the YPG-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces. Now they have been pushed back into areas that are mostly, but not totally, Kurdish, and the integration process is ongoing. So the U.S. boots on the ground in northeastern Syria are also obsolete. So we will probably see a full withdrawal from northeastern Syria. But that doesn't mean that the United States of America will have no military presence in Syria anymore.
I'm very
I expect that Damascus and the US.
Understood. Omar, I'm keen to know what Turkey might do with this security preeminence in the region there. Does Ankara believe the new al-Shaddadi government is actually capable of securing these border regions against ISIL, or is Turkey potentially preparing to expand its own buffer zone if Damascus fails to hold the line, to keep these threats at bay?
I believe Turkey believes that Damascus can do this job, and Damascus is the most feasible partner to do that. But there are some certain capabilities that require a modern and professional army like the US or the Turkish army. And actually, there were some agreements between Turkey and Syria, not declared to the public, but we know from the troop deployments on the ground, that had foreseen further Turkish military presence and expanded Turkish military presence in Syria. But that hadn't happened due to the Israeli rejection and the Israeli preeminent strikes against the bases where Turkey planned to deploy its forces. So now with the US going out, we have to see, maybe the United States of America and the international coalition to fight ISIS may even demand and try to convince the Turkish government to expand its military presence in Syria. But we are not there yet. I believe the sides are in negotiations to find out if a pathway forward. Maybe we will see a new US base in Damascus, or we will see an expanded Turkish military world, because the Syrian government, despite all its willingness, there are certain capabilities that they just don't possess, and training them will require time. So who will be the partner, the professional partner of the Syrian army on the ground against ISIS once the US leaves?
Okay, so it's a withdrawal to an extent, but can a power, namely the Americans, actually claim to have withdrawn if it remains the primary actor in Syria's airspace and also, obviously, a principal diplomatic driver behind the scenes?
Let's be honest here. The United States of America enjoys air dominance across the entirety of the Middle East, and the United States of America has the capability to fly literally anywhere in the Middle East they want to. There is no state that can hinder the US air dominance. It's even across the globe. It's probably China and Russia that could limit it to some extent. So therefore, the United States of America, anytime they feel the necessity to do that, they will conduct airstrikes against ISIS or other terrorist targets in Syria, but not only in Syria, but in other regions. If there's a threat the US deems necessary, they will act. And so from the airspace perspective, there is no discussion about US withdrawal or not. It's the discussions on about US ground forces on the ground, the boots on the ground, that are going to withdraw soon, probably.
All right. Many thanks for clearing all of that up for us. Omar Özkılıççık, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Pleasure. Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.